There's a possibility you won't be alive by next week. Those words still echo in my mind every single day. They cut through me like a blade made of ice and terror, slicing apart everything I thought I knew about safety, about family, about love itself. That's what the plumber whispered to me after what he saw in my basement. His voice trembled like autumn leaves in a storm, his eyes wide and hollow as if he had just stared into the face of death itself and seen my name written there in blood. He grabbed my wrist with hands that shook like earthquake tremors, his fingers cold and desperate, and said words that would haunt me forever. "Pack your things now. Don't tell your son-in-law. Just go." The urgency in his voice wasn't just fear, it was the kind of desperate terror that comes from knowing something so horrible, so unthinkable, that speaking it aloud feels like summoning demons from the darkest corners of hell. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned to concrete, heavy and suffocating. How could a man who came to renovate my bathroom, a stranger with calloused hands and tired eyes, tell me I might not survive the week? How could he know something about my own home, my own life, that I didn't know? But when I looked into his eyes, really looked, I saw something worse than fear. I saw certainty. I saw the weight of truth that had crushed his soul, and I knew with sickening clarity that my world was about to crumble into dust and ashes. Before I tell you what he discovered in that basement, what he found lurking in the shadows like a cancer eating away at my very existence, and how it shattered everything I believed about my family, about trust, about the people we let into our hearts and homes, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story. This is a warning carved from my own flesh and blood, written with the ink of betrayal so deep it stained my soul black. Because what I found in that basement didn't just change my life forever. It nearly ended it. Let me take you back to when my world still made sense, when the sun still felt warm on my skin and the walls of my home still felt like protection instead of a tomb. My name is Margaret, and 6 months ago, I was just another widow trying to make sense of a world suddenly empty of the man who had shared my bed for 43 years. The silence in my house after Harold's funeral was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It pressed against my chest like a weight, making every breath feel like drowning in slow motion. That's when my daughter Sarah came to me with tears in her eyes and love in her voice, suggesting that she and her husband David move in to help me through this difficult time. "You shouldn't be alone, Mom," she said, her hand warm on mine, her voice soft as silk. "Let us take care of you for a while." And God help me, I was so grateful. So desperately, pathetically grateful to not face those empty rooms and endless nights alone. David seemed like such a blessing then. He was the kind of man who spoke in gentle tones and moved through our house like he was afraid of disturbing sacred ground. He had these soft brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and hands that looked strong enough to fix anything that broke. "Don't you worry about a thing, Margaret," he would say, his voice warm as honey. "I'll take care of everything. The repairs, the bills, all of it. You just focus on healing." Those first few weeks felt like salvation. I would wake to the smell of coffee already brewing, would find fresh flowers on the kitchen table that David had picked from Harold's garden. He would sit with me in the evenings, listening to my stories about Harold with what seemed like genuine interest, his eyes never leaving my face as I spoke. When I mentioned that the upstairs bathroom had developed a small leak, he was on his feet immediately. "I'll handle it," he said, and something in his voice made me look up. There was an edge there, sharp as broken glass, but when I met his eyes, he was smiling that same gentle smile. "Don't worry about calling anyone. I know exactly who to call." I should have paid attention to that moment. I should have noticed how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, how his hands clenched just a little too tight when he spoke. I should have seen the way he watched me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, not with love or concern, but with something colder, something calculating. But grief makes you blind to so many things. Grief makes you grateful for any kindness, any warmth, any sign that you still matter to someone in this world. So when David insisted on handling the plumber himself, when he said, "Don't call anyone else, I'll handle it," with that strange firmness in his voice, I just nodded. I trusted him. God forgive me, I trusted him completely. The plumber arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt ordinary in every way. Sunshine streaming through my kitchen windows, birds singing their morning songs, the world carrying on as if evil wasn't already growing like a tumor in the walls around me. He was an older man, maybe 65, with silver hair and hands that spoke of decades of honest work. His name was Frank, and he had these tired, knowing eyes that seemed to have seen too much sorrow in his lifetime. "Ma'am," he said when I answered the door, his voice gravelly but kind. "I'm here about the bathroom leak." There was something about him that felt different from David's chosen contractors, something real and solid, like bedrock beneath shifting sand. When David introduced them, I noticed how Frank's eyes lingered on David's face, studying him with the intensity of someone reading fine print in a contract. Frank began his work upstairs, and for the first hour, everything seemed normal. I could hear the gentle sounds of tools against pipes, the occasional footstep across the bathroom floor. But then Frank appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale as winter moonlight. "Ma'am," he called down, his voice careful and controlled, "I need access to your basement. There are some pipes down there that connect to this system, and I need to check them before I can fix this properly." David was at work, Sarah was out shopping, and I was alone with this stranger who was asking to go into the depths of my house. But something in Frank's voice, a careful professionalism mixed with what I would later recognize as growing concern, made me nod and point him toward the basement door. "Take your time," I told him. "I'll be up here if you need anything." He disappeared into that basement, and for 20 minutes, my house fell into a silence so complete it felt like the world holding its breath. No sounds of tools, no footsteps, nothing but the occasional metallic clang that seemed to echo up from the depths like a warning bell. And then there was a smell, something chemical and wrong that drifted up the stairs like invisible smoke, making my nose burn and my stomach turn. When Frank finally emerged from that basement, his face was the color of old ash, and his hands were shaking like he'd touched something that had burned him to the bone. He moved like a man walking through a nightmare, his eyes wide and haunted, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Ma'am," he said, and I could hear the tremor in every syllable, "I need you to sit down." I laughed then, a weak sound that broke apart in my throat like glass. "Is it that bad? How expensive is this going to be?" But Frank didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just stood there in my kitchen, this stranger who had descended into my basement and emerged carrying some terrible knowledge that was eating him alive from the inside. "Ma'am," he said again, and his voice was so gentle, so full of pain, that I felt my heart start to race. "There's a possibility you won't be alive by next week." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and the strength from my legs. I sank into the nearest chair, my hands gripping the table until my knuckles went white. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, but even as I asked, some deep part of me already knew. Some animal instinct buried in my bones was screaming danger, screaming run, screaming that the walls around me weren't protection, they were a trap. Frank pulled out a chair and sat across from me, his eyes never leaving mine. "What's down there in your basement?" he said slowly, carefully, like he was handling explosives. "Wasn't installed by any professional company. It's not in any manual, and it's not meant to help anything." "Ma'am, what I found down there, it's deliberate." I shook my head so hard it made me dizzy. "No," I said, my voice rising with panic and disbelief. "No, you're wrong. David fixed this house. He's been taking care of everything. He's family. He would never hurt me. Never." But Frank's expression only grew darker, sadder, like he was watching me defend my own executioner. "Ma'am," he said softly, "that's exactly what I thought once. Before I lost someone too." The pain in his voice was so raw, so real, that it cut through my denial like a knife through paper. I could see the weight of old grief in his eyes, the burden of knowledge that had come too late to save someone he loved. And in that moment, I knew with terrifying clarity that he wasn't lying, wasn't confused, wasn't mistaken. "If you don't believe me," he said, standing slowly like an old man carrying the weight of the world, "come see it yourself." The walk to that basement door felt like walking to my own execution. Every step was agony, every breath was fire in my lungs. Frank went first, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a sword, and I followed on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The basement air was cold and thick, tasting of chemicals and something else, something that made my skin crawl and my stomach turn. Frank led me past the familiar landscape of my basement, Harold's old workbench, boxes of Christmas decorations, the water heater that had been humming faithfully for 15 years. But then we reached the far corner, the area that David had said he'd updated and asked me not to worry about. Frank's flashlight beam fell on something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. There, hidden behind a false wall that looked like it belonged, was a metal unit the size of a small refrigerator. Tubes snaked from it like mechanical serpents, disappearing into the ductwork that carried air throughout my house. But what made me nearly collapse were the small canisters inside the unit, each one labeled with names I couldn't pronounce, chemicals that had no business being in any home. "This system," Frank said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of my heart pounding in my ears, "is feeding gas directly into your bedroom." The words hit me like lightning, illuminating everything with terrible clarity. The weeks of dizziness that David had attributed to grief. The constant fatigue that he said was normal for someone my age. The headaches that came and went like tides, always worse at night, always better when I left the house. The way David would bring me tea when I felt sick, his eyes full of what I had thought was love but now recognized as something infinitely colder. "The special tea," I whispered, my voice breaking like old glass. He always brought me tea when I felt sick. Frank's hand was gentle on my shoulder, but I could feel the tension in his touch, the urgency of a man who knew we were running out of time. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we need to get you out of here. Tonight." I stumbled back upstairs on legs that felt like water, my mind reeling with the magnitude of what I had seen. Every memory was rewriting itself, every kindness revealing its poisonous truth. David's insistence on handling all the repairs wasn't love, it was opportunity. His gentle concern for my health wasn't compassion, it was monitoring his victim. His presence in my home wasn't protection, it was slow-motion murder dressed up as family devotion. "But why?" I whispered to Frank as we stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where David had smiled at me over coffee just that morning. Why would he want to hurt me? Frank's eyes were infinitely sad, carrying the weight of knowledge that no one should have to bear. "Because money makes monsters, ma'am. And some people, they look at kindness and see weakness. They look at trust and see opportunity." The truth was like acid in my veins, burning away everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my safety. David wasn't the gentle son-in-law who had come to care for a grieving widow. He was a predator who had seen opportunity in my loneliness, who had moved into my home like a virus, slowly poisoning my body while poisoning my daughter's mind against me. Frank helped me pack with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Just the essentials. My identification, important documents, medications, a few changes of clothes. Every item I touched felt heavy with betrayal. Every photograph on my dresser now looked like evidence of how blind I had been, how completely I had been fooled. As we prepared to leave, I heard Sarah's voice calling from upstairs, sleepy and confused. "Mom? Where are you going?" It's the middle of the night. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up toward the voice of my daughter, my baby girl who had somehow become part of this nightmare. My heart was breaking into pieces so small they could never be put back together, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "Just up for some air, sweetheart," I called back, the light tasting like poison on my tongue. Go back to sleep. Walking down my own driveway with a small suitcase in my hand was the hardest thing I had ever done. Each step felt like dying a little, like leaving pieces of my soul scattered on the pavement behind me. The streetlight cast my shadow long and thin, and I watched it shrink as I moved further from the house that had been my prison, the home that had been my tomb. I was fleeing from my own family. From the daughter I had raised, the man she had married, the life I had tried so hard to rebuild after Harold's death. And the most devastating part wasn't that they had tried to kill me, it was that they had made me grateful for it. They had poisoned my body while poisoning my mind, making me thank them for every dose of death they fed me. Frank drove me to an all-night diner on the edge of town, a place that felt like a refuge between worlds. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, with coffee growing cold between my hands, he told me his story. His voice was quiet, broken, carrying the weight of guilt that would never leave him. My mother died 3 years ago, he said, staring into his coffee like it held answers to questions he'd never stop asking. Brain cancer, the doctors said. Sudden onset, aggressive, nothing they could do. But I was the one who found the pills hidden in her house after the funeral. Pills that weren't prescribed to anyone, pills that could cause every symptom she'd been having. His hands shook as he spoke, and I could see the agony in his eyes, the torture of knowledge that came too late, understanding that arrived after love had already been buried. It was her caregiver, he continued. Someone she trusted, someone she thought of as family. I couldn't prove it, not in court anyway. But I knew. And I swore that if I ever saw the signs again, if I ever had the chance to save someone else, I wouldn't let it happen again. We sat in that diner booth like two survivors of the same war, bound together by the terrible knowledge of how evil could wear the mask of love, how murder could masquerade as mercy. Frank helped me call the police, helped me understand that what I had discovered wasn't just attempted murder, it was a calculated plan that had been months in the making. Sometimes, Frank said as dawn began to creep through the diner windows, the ones who come to fix our houses end up saving our lives. But even as we planned, even as we gathered evidence and prepared to expose the truth, my phone began to ring. David's name flashed on the screen again and again, each call more insistent than the last. When I finally answered, his voice was different. The gentle mask was slipping, revealing something cold and sharp underneath. "Margaret, where are you?" he asked, and there was an edge to his voice that made my skin crawl. "Sarah and I are worried sick. You shouldn't be out alone at night." "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just needed some air." "Come home," he said, and now the command was clear, the threat barely hidden beneath concern. "Come home now, or we'll have to come find you." When I hung up, Frank's face was grim. "They know," he said simply. "We need to act fast." The next hours were a blur of police stations and evidence bags, of detectives who looked at Frank's photographs with growing horror and prosecutors who spoke in terms of attempted murder and conspiracy. But David and Sarah weren't sitting idle. They had been tracking my movements for months, monitoring my phone, knowing exactly where I was at all times. They found us at the motel where Frank had helped me check in under an assumed name. I was coming out of the ice machine alcove when I saw them, David blocking the exit, his face no longer gentle but cold and calculating as winter stone. Sarah stood beside him, and in her hand was a syringe filled with something clear and deadly. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine tears, "you're sick. You're confused. This man has brainwashed you, filled your head with paranoid delusions. We're here to help you." David stepped closer, and I could see the truth in his eyes now, the complete absence of anything human, anything warm, anything that had ever cared about my well-being. "You're having a breakdown, Margaret," he said in that same gentle voice he'd used to offer me poison disguised as tea. "We need to get you to a hospital." Frank positioned himself between them and me, his phone already dialing 911. "Stay back," he said, his voice steady despite the terror I could see in his eyes. "The police are already on their way." The syringe in Sarah's hand caught the light from the motel's neon sign, gleaming like liquid death. "You don't understand," she said, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. "He loves you. We both love you. We're trying to help you." But I could see the truth now, could see how completely David had poisoned her mind along with my body. She believed she was saving me, believed that killing me was an act of mercy. That was the most devastating part, knowing that my daughter had been turned into a weapon against me, that her love had been twisted into something deadly. The police sirens were getting closer, their wail cutting through the night air like a promise of salvation. David's eyes grew desperate, calculating, and I saw him make the decision to finish what he had started. He lunged forward just as Frank threw himself between us, and chaos erupted in that motel parking lot like violence made manifest. The arrest was brutal and chaotic, Sarah screaming that we were the criminals, that David was innocent, that I was sick and needed help. David remained silent through it all, his eyes cold and empty as they put him in handcuffs. Even as they read him his rights, even as they loaded him into the police car, he never stopped watching me with those calculating eyes. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of their plan with surgical precision. David had installed the poisoning system during what he called bathroom renovations, hiding his work behind legitimate repairs. The insurance policy he had convinced me to update would have made Sarah and him very wealthy widows. The property transfer documents he had helped me organize would have given them complete control of my estate. But the most devastating revelation was that Sarah had known. Not everything, not the full scope of the poisoning, but enough. She knew David was giving me something in my tea. She knew my symptoms weren't natural. She knew I was dying, and she had convinced herself it was merciful, that I was suffering too much to live. During the trial, I had to sit in that courtroom and listen to the details of my own planned murder read aloud like a shopping list. The chemicals that were slowly destroying my nervous system. The timeline they had calculated for my death. The funeral arrangements they had already made. It was like watching my own autopsy while I was still alive. When it came time for victim impact statements, I stood before the man who had lived in my house, eaten at my table, pretended to love my daughter, and I spoke the only words that mattered. "You didn't just try to kill my body," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "You poisoned love itself. You took the trust of a grieving widow and turned it into a weapon. You turned my daughter's compassion into complicity. You made my home into a tomb and called it kindness." David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah received 15 years for conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder. As they led her away, she finally looked at me with clear eyes for the first time in months, and I saw the moment when the full weight of what she had done crashed down on her shoulders. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking like crystal against stone. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But sorry couldn't bring back the months of my life they had stolen, couldn't erase the fear that now lived in my bones, couldn't rebuild the trust that had been shattered into pieces too small to ever fit back together. I moved to a small apartment by the ocean, where the sound of waves replaced the hum of hidden machines, where the salt air cleaned the chemical taste from my lungs. Frank became more than my savior. He became my dearest friend, the only person who truly understood the weight of what we had both survived. Every morning, I wake to the sound of seagulls instead of poison pumping through my walls. Every night, I go to sleep knowing that the air I breathe is clean, that the water I drink is pure, that the walls around me are protection instead of a trap. But the scars run deeper than my lungs, deeper than my blood. I thought I knew my family. I thought love was protection, that kindness was always pure, that trust was a gift you could give without fear. But love without truth can become a weapon more deadly than any knife. Trust without wisdom can become a poison more lethal than any chemical. The hardest part isn't the betrayal, it's learning to trust again. Learning to accept help without suspicion, learning to drink tea without fear, learning to sleep in my own bed without wondering if I'll wake up. The hardest part is understanding that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like family. Sometimes it speaks in gentle voices and offers to take care of you. Sometimes it comes disguised as love. Frank and I meet for coffee every Tuesday now, two survivors bound together by the terrible knowledge of how close death can come wearing the mask of kindness. We don't talk about the trial anymore, don't relive the details of what was done to us. Instead, we talk about the future, about healing, about the small miracles of waking up each morning still alive. "You saved my life," I tell him sometimes, and he always shakes his head. "We saved each other," he says. "I couldn't save my mother, but I could save you." And maybe that's how healing works, not by undoing the past, but by making sure it doesn't happen again. Trust can be rebuilt, but never blindly. Love can be restored, but never without wisdom. And sometimes, the person who saves your life is the one who simply believed your fear instead of dismissing it, who saw the truth you were too close to see, who refused to let evil masquerade as mercy. I visit my daughter in prison sometimes. She looks older now, her face marked by the weight of understanding what she helped do to me. We don't talk about forgiveness. That's a bridge too far broken to rebuild. But we talk about truth, about the importance of questioning what we're told, about how love can be twisted into something deadly when we stop thinking for ourselves. I wanted to believe him so badly, she tells me through the glass that separates us. He made it sound like mercy. He made it sound like love. And that's the lesson that haunts me most of all, how easily we can be convinced that cruelty is kindness when it comes from someone we trust, how quickly we can become complicit in our own destruction when we stop asking questions, stop demanding truth, stop trusting our own instincts. Every sunrise now feels like a gift I almost didn't receive. Every breath of clean air is a victory over the poison that tried to steal my life. Every day I wake up alive is proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the truth arrives in time to save us. But the truth is this: evil is patient. It doesn't always come with fanfare and drama. Sometimes it moves into your house slowly, quietly, wearing the face of someone you love. Sometimes it speaks in gentle voices and offers to take care of everything. Sometimes it makes you grateful for your own destruction. And the only defense against that kind of evil is the courage to trust your own fear, the wisdom to question what you're told, and the strength to run when every instinct in your body screams danger, even when that danger is wearing the face of family. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people you trust and the reasons you trust them, then it has served its purpose. Because somewhere out there, someone else is living in a house where love has been poisoned, where kindness masks cruelty, where family has become the enemy. And maybe, just maybe, my story will help them see the truth before it's too late. Maybe it will give them the courage to trust their fear, to ask the hard questions, to run when they need to run. Because sometimes, the person who saves your life is the one who simply believed your story when everyone else called you crazy. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, from strangers who refuse to let evil hide behind the mask of love. Sometimes the only way to survive is to stop being grateful for your own destruction and start fighting for your right to live. That's my story. That's my truth. And if it saves even one person from the poison disguised as love, then every moment of pain, every sleepless night, every broken piece of trust was worth it. Because in the end, the truth isn't just about exposing evil, it's about choosing life over death, wisdom over blind faith, courage over comfortable lies. And sometimes, that choice makes all the difference between surviving and becoming another victim of love turned toxic, trust turned deadly, family turned weapon. Choose wisely. Trust carefully. And never, ever ignore the voice inside you that whispers danger when everyone else is telling you you're safe. That voice might be the only thing standing between you and a poison disguised as kindness, a death disguised as mercy, a murder disguised as love.